Welcome back to our study on the book of Romans. This is the Romans Education Part 7, and this is Session 10. In your note taker, in your notes, there is one area of note taker, and I wanted us to make sure that we got this down. And it has to do with answering a question that I've already given you the answer for, which is what I get for not looking at the notes. That why in the world would God want to make such catastrophic changes? And I've already given you the answer to that, so let me just put it up. By what God did in His destruction of the world of the ungodly men, and by the changes He made with the world itself and the heavens, God was, and the yellow is what you'll be filling in there, He was slowing down Satan's ability to bring the world to the brink of destruction again. Now that's the only note-taker place that you have in your notes, but I want to make sure that we all kind of have that in our mind, so that the policy of evil, even though it's still operating, it's not able to operate at the speed or at the rate that it did in the time before the flood. I know that when you look at that, you think, well, actually there was a lot of years there, and that is, I mean, for just 3 chapters, there is quite a number of years there. But really, when you look at the generations, that's not a long time for Satan to bring about the world of the ungodly. And so God is putting a governor, so to speak, on the engine of Satan's policy of evil, so that it's not able to return the world to that state of ungodliness in such a short period of time. Now let's look back at 2 Peter chapter 2 and look at verse 5. And spared not the old world, but saved Noah. Oh, I remember what I was going to tell you. Will you remind me after I say this? Okay, I almost forgot that I was supposed to remember. And spared not the old world, but saved Noah, the 8th person, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood upon the world of the ungodly, and turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemned them with an overthrow, making them an ensample unto those that after should live ungodly. There's 3 things I need to talk about right here. Number 1. He's giving us examples, He's giving the believing remnant examples in 2 Peter. The first one he talks about, and God spared not the angels that sinned, remember, but cast them down and delivered them unto chains of darkness reserved, for the day of judgment. Those angels that sinned are talking about the angels that in the time before the flood, those angels performed some particular activities that would have ensured that the world would have remained the world of the ungodly permanently. The things that he was doing with the angels there was to make sure that that would not be reversed. It was irreversible. And that is why that's another reason why God destroyed the world with the flood, put 8 people in the ark, and then delivered those angels into chains of darkness reserved against the day of judgment. There was something, now we've talked about this long ago, and I didn't want to get off on that again. If we have time at the end of the session, I may come back and we'll make reference to that. So if you can remind me, I'll talk about what those particular activities were. But those were things that were designed to make sure that the world remained in a permanent, ungodly position. The second thing is that God brought in the flood. Okay, that was the angels that sinned. And then the second thing in the passage was, and God spared not the old world, but that world being overflowed with water perished. So the second thing to know is that God was making changes in the heavens and in the earth that slowed down Satan's policy of evil. Now we come to the third thing in that passage, And that is, okay, and so let me just put it up here. The second thing was the old world, the changes that were made, that it was no longer the way it was before. And now you have these cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. And he says, and he spared not the old world, but saved Noah, the eighth person, a preacher of righteousness, bringing the flood upon the world of the ungodly, and turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemned them with an overthrow, making them an ensample unto those that after should live ungodly. What's the point that God is after here? And by the way, let's put something else on our timeline. Let me erase that because I wrote it in the wrong spot and I need to... you've got this on your timeline, so I'm just going to erase that off of mine so I can get this in. So what we did is we looked at those things, we put them up on there, but what I want to do now is draw a line right down like, well, let's see, let's just do it like this. And you're going to draw that in between, on your timeline, it should come down right beside where it says the world of the ungodly. And that'll be Genesis chapter 18. Because this is the Sodom and Gomorrah issue that's being talked about now. We're going to put that on the timeline. And as we put that event on the timeline, you understand that here's what we had. We had, well, I'm not going to get away from it, am I? Genesis 3 to 6 through 9. So here's the flood that comes in and God judges the world. And then you have Sodom and Gomorrah. That's after the flood. And that's exactly what that word after that I've highlighted in the verse is pointing out to us, that God is saying, this is how I'm going to deal with ungodliness. In other words, look at the last part of this, verse 6. And turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemned them with an overthrow, making them an ensample. Do you remember what the difference between an example and an ensample is? An ensample is something from within. Let's say Bob's in Sam's. And you know how they set up those little stations and they open up a bag of chips and they're getting you to try these new chips? So she opens up this bag and she hands Bob a chip and he tastes it and goes, wow, that's fantastic. I think I want a bag. So she just twists the top and hands him the bag she just gave him a chip out of. That chip wasn't just an example of the chips he was going to get. It's an ensample of the chips he's going to get. It's right out of that. Do you understand? Well, Sodom and Gomorrah is, God is saying, after the flood, judge the world of the ungodly. I'm going to give, now, see, after that's over, people may be saying, okay, God did that. And He's not going to destroy the world again with a flood. We've got the rainbow as the sign of that. So, if we're ungodly after that, what? We get away with it? Well, here's what was written. God made Sodom and Gomorrah an ensample unto those that should after what? After the flood. For those that come, because remember what's back here. I erased it all and I shouldn't have. It's the old world. God is saying, okay, I judged that in the old world. Now, you know what? You're in the post-flood world. God says, I'm still going to deal with ungodliness this way, and I'm going to use Sodom and Gomorrah as an example of how I'm going to deal with that ungodliness. And really, there's something else that's more than that that's going on here. And I think I'll just have to wait until we get there. So take a look, 2 Peter 3:7, back to that. It says, but the heavens and the earth which are now by the same word are kept in store, reserved unto fire against the day of judgment and perdition of ungodly men. But is that day of judgment, is that what happened to Sodom and Gomorrah? No, that was an example of it, but that wasn't it. In other words, that was a picture of it, but that wasn't really it. When people became ungodly and evil, they were still to know this truth, that there is a day when God is going to judge ungodliness and judge evil. He is still going to do that. That's what the Lord's day of wrath is all about, when He's going to judge that ungodliness that is on this earth. And so, even though things have differed since the flood, God's idea about that has not changed. He is still going to judge that ungodliness in the world. Now I'm going to take you over to the book of Jude. I'm going to show you something very interesting here. I'm sorry, Genesis. Why in the world am I taking you to Genesis? Is that next? I missed the Jude passage. Can I just take you over there in your Bible? I'm sorry, I missed it off the notes, evidently. Did I? No, I'm going to get to it. I should have read it first. Let me just take you over there on the PowerPoint. We'll come back to this. Right here. And Enoch also, the seventh from Adam, prophesied of these, saying, Behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000s of His saints, to execute judgment upon all, and to convince all that are ungodly among them of all their ungodly deeds which they have ungodly committed, and of all their hard speeches which ungodly sinners have spoken against Him. Now, look what he says here in Jude. He's talking about, and Enoch also, the seventh from Adam, prophesied of these, saying, Behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000. Well, who's the Enoch that he's talking about? Now let me back you up to Genesis. And by the way, you should have, it's not a genealogy, it kind of is. You should have something on your notes that's a list that runs from Adam down to the flood or to Noah. Do you see that somewhere there in your notes? All right. There's some years there, and I'll explain what those years are in just a moment. But this is the Enoch that's being talked about. And here's how we got there. We were in 2 Peter. In 2 Peter, he talks about God is going to judge. He did judge the world of the ungodly, and He is still going to have a day of judgment for the ungodly. When you get to the book of Jude, suddenly now you're going to get details about things that Peter was writing about, but he's going to give you additional information about that. So we're going to get back to that Jude passage so you can see it with that in mind. But when he talks about an Enoch also, who is the seventh from Adam, in other words, he's 7 generations. Enoch did something. He prophesied about that judgment that God was going to perform on the ungodly. And now I'm taking you to Genesis 5, so take a look with me here. And Enoch lived 65 years and begat Methuselah. And Enoch walked with God after he begat Methuselah 300 years and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Enoch were 365 years. Now I'll just put that out beside him here. Enoch lives 365 years. Now he's the shortest of all those generations. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Now, I want to talk to you about this genealogy that I put in there, because Adam lives to be 930 years old. On your chart, you'll see 3 numbers beside Adam. 130. When Adam is 130 years old, he has a son named Seth. After that, after Seth is born, Adam lives an additional 800 years. So from here to here is 800. And that gives him a total of 930 years. Now, I just want you to see this for a couple of reasons. First of all, you understand that everybody's lifetime, these are pretty long. As a matter of fact, as we're looking at the list here, and I could just take this to the board, Seth lives to be 912. That's a pretty long lifetime. And then you've got 905 for Enos, 910 for Canaan. Let's see, 895 for Mahalalel. Jared is 962. Wow, that is way up there. We already know that Enoch is 365. Methuselah is 969, and Lamech is 950. All right, now I'm just giving you those numbers, and you have them all right there. But I'm giving you these because I want you to see something. If we were to take this line from when Adam dies and bring it down, you would find out that it right here, Noah's father, when Adam dies, Noah's father, Lamech, is 65 years old. Now, so you see that Lamech is 182 years old when Noah is born. But he's 65 years old when Adam dies, which means Noah's father and everyone back, Adam was still alive and on the earth. So when you look at that, I mean, that's pretty amazing, isn't it? When you're talking about the long lifespan, I'm saying, yes, there's a lot of years, when you think about it that way, from Genesis 3 to Genesis 6, but you're really, I mean, he's the 7th, there's the 8th, there's the 9th. Noah's only the 10th generation from Adam. That's all there is. In 10 generations, Satan has successfully produced the world of the ungodly in 10 generations. That's nothing. I mean, in today's lifespan, how long would it take you to get 10 generations? I mean, we talk about a generation being 40 years, but let's face it. In 40 years, I mean, there's me. My kids are born in my 20s, early 20s, and I'm trying to think. Any of my kids have none of my grandkids have kids, but I have kids and grandkids. There's 3 generations. I mean, really, you're talking about. I'm talking about a generation that way. In 10 generations, this thing is all gone. You're almost to Noah. Now, there's one other thing that there's several other things that we need to know here. First of all, the scriptures that we're looking at, and I'm sorry I've done such a bad job today of trying to tie all this together for you. It's kind of been like a wander through who knows where. And when we get to the end, hopefully you'll all be able to look at it and go, oh, this is where we were going. Okay. But the names, there's 3 characters that are very important in all of this, and this started back there in 2 Peter where we were looking at this. And that is, well, I can just do them for you here. That's going to be Enoch, Methuselah, and Noah. Now, Lamech is Noah's father. But these guys all come up and their names mean something. Now, this won't be totally new to everybody, but you remember, Enoch is the guy that Jude prophesied. He said, and Enoch, the 7th from Adam, prophesied something about the Lord coming to judge the ungodly. Now, when did Enoch live? Did he live before the flood or after the flood? He lived before the flood. So before the flood, there was a prophecy that was given about the Lord coming to judge the ungodly. We can look at that again. In fact, let me just take you over there and show you that. And we'll look at these numbers here again in just a moment. And Enoch also, the 7th from Adam. So 7 generations from Adam, there was a guy who prophesied of these, saying, behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000s of His saints to execute judgment upon all, and to convince, and now look at the use of the term ungodly here, to convince all that are ungodly among them of all their ungodly deeds which they have ungodly committed, and of all their hard speeches which ungodly sinners have spoken against Him. God says there's a payday coming for this. There's a judgment day coming for this. And where was that? That was back here in the pre-flood world. So somewhere here in the old world before the flood, there was a time when Enoch prophesied about a coming judgment. But did the Lord come with 10,000s of His saints at the flood? He did not. He did not. But it wasn't over at the flood, because we find in Genesis 18 that God destroys Sodom and Gomorrah as a type of the judgment that Enoch prophesied about. That judgment is still coming. So now we say, and remember, that was an ensample for those after the flood. And by the way, he uses that term ungodly over there as well. That thing has been all through here. It was in 2 Peter 2, it was in 2 Peter 3, now we've seen it again in Jude. And so these generations, which aren't very many, this is all it takes in order for Satan's policy of evil to produce a darkness that so overwhelmed the world that God would have to destroy it. But here's what you're going to find. That the flood that ended the old world, for all, I'm saying it this way, and I'm not sure this is, again, the best way to say it. This is part A of a judgment that is connected to the one that we saw earlier in Peter, where he says, "But the heavens and the earth which are now are kept in store by the same word and reserved unto the day of judgment." You remember that? So these two are connected. And this is like part A, and this is like part B. Now God did this because He needed to deal with the overwhelming evil and ungodliness of the world. We've seen some things about that already. Remember, that was one of the reasons for God instituting human government, because you have to find a way to control the population. Because what was there? There was violence that filled the earth. So that's part of the change that took place that slowed down Satan's policy of evil from producing a world of ungodliness. But you know what? Then, by the time it gets to right here on the timeline, the world has come to a place again where it is worthy of that destruction. Now, if you don't know about the dispensation of grace, then here's what you know. This is the next thing. So it has come back to a place now where it is worthy to be destroyed. All right, now look, I'm kind of getting off track, so let me go back to these others. When Enoch makes that prophecy, he has a son named Methuselah. And Methuselah's name means, when he is dead, it shall come. Talking about the judgment of the flood. Well, Methuselah dies, I want to say 1656, and that's right. Methuselah, if you count the years, and that's the reason I gave them to you there. If you take all of those years that in the first column, Adam's 130 when he has Seth, Seth's 105 when he has Enos, Enos is 90 when he has Canaan, etc., etc. If you add all of those up and you come all the way down to Methuselah, and then you see that Methuselah lives 969 years, then what you find is that Methuselah dies in this year, 1656. That's the year that he dies. If you take those numbers and you keep going, and you realize that Methuselah has Lamech when he's 187, and Lamech has Noah when he's 182, and you realize that the flood comes in the 600th year of Noah's life. Guess when the flood comes? In the exact same year that Methuselah dies, in 1656. Now, I actually had a chart that I meant to duplicate and bring to you, and I didn't do it. It's sitting on my kitchen table. And I knew when I got in here I had left it, and I told Billy, I can't believe I left that. But what I was showing you is that his name actually was referring to the flood, because the year he dies is, and all you have to do is run the numbers, is the same year that the flood comes. So you know what God is doing? He is holding off the flood until the end of Methuselah's life. It comes in the 600th year of Noah's life. And so what God has done with that is exactly what He said He would do. The reason that I'm talking to you about all of these, and we know that Noah is in on this, Enoch gave a prophecy. Methuselah is the guy that's the signal for the flood. Noah is the guy that God uses to take them through the time of the flood, and of course for mankind to survive out on the other end. But he didn't do that at the flood. What Enoch prophesied about, what that is saying in verse 14, that the Lord is coming with 10,000s of His saints to execute judgment, didn't happen back there. That's still something that is yet future. Now, in Romans chapter 13 and verse 12, God is going to, and I'm going to take you over to Ephesians. I'm just going to remind you this because I know everyone knows about this. But back at that time, we Gentiles were in a very particular position. Here it is in Ephesians. Paul describes it. Wherefore remember that ye being in time past, so that's back here in Israel's time past program. Gentiles in the flesh who are called uncircumcision by that which is called the circumcision in the flesh made by hands. That at that time, now remember, we're back here in Israel's time past. At that time you were without Christ, being aliens from the commonwealth of Israel, and strangers from the covenants of promise, having no hope, and without God in the world. Now, of course, then he's going to go on in verse 13 and say, all that is changed now in this dispensation of grace. That's different. Now, we know that, and I'm not trying to teach you about that. But what I'm trying to say is that the message that was given all the way back here by Enoch, that God was going to judge the ungodliness of the world, that was a message that God had given to the world. The example of Sodom and Gomorrah was God's reinforcement of that message. He is still determined to judge the future ungodliness of the world. Now we're going to look back at the timeline, and so here's what we have. And this is the reason I'm giving you all this, because, in fact, I need to erase something because it's kind of in my way here. Get rid of that. All right, you've got Genesis 18 on your chart there. And so what I'm going to have you do is I'm going to have you draw a couple of boxes. I'm going to have you draw a line that's down from right here. And so right here, middle wall of partition. That's the way the Bible describes it. The middle wall of partition. And then below that, I'm just going to kind of put this bracket down below, and I'm going to put another box down here, and we're going to identify that time, because from Genesis 18, from the time of Sodom and Gomorrah, this is, Satan is once again develop the world of the ungodly. That period of time, really, this is going to run from Genesis 12, and I don't want to get, because that's when God starts it with Abraham. But this thing, what Satan is doing is he is once again developing the world of the ungodly, and when this comes all the way down from right here, that's what's happened again. In other words, Satan developed the world of the ungodly in the pre-flood world, and then God judged the world and judged the ungodliness of the world. He made changes that slowed down the policy of evil so it couldn't produce the world of the ungodly quite so quickly, but Satan is still working to develop the world of the ungodly. Now, the reason I'm putting in the middle wall of partition is because right now, above the middle wall of partition, this is God's dealing with Israel. Look, the kingdom is at hand. Remember? The extension of mercy, and the kingdom is still at hand. Below, on the other side of the wall of partition, this is God's dealing with Gentiles, or His dealings with the world at large. And that's really what we're concentrating on now. Yes, Israel's ungodliness also came to a zenith. But that's not what we're looking at. We're looking at the ungodliness of the world because that's what God said that He would judge. And so what Satan is doing is, while he is trying to corrupt Israel, there is something going on with Satan in his policy of evil that attempts to corrupt the world at large, and actually to produce a darkness in the world at large. Now this, I've done really inadequately in trying to set this up for you. So let me see if I can take all of these strings that we've got floating out there and pull them all together here, right here at the end. Let me just say it like this, and you tell me if you understand it this way. From the time that Satan tempted Eve in the garden, working through that timeline to Genesis 6, Satan successfully produced the world of the ungodly. And it was so bad that God saved 8 people and destroyed everyone else in the flood. And then He made some changes so that that would not be able to be done quite so quickly again, because that was done in 10 generations. Now, from that time, what happened then in Genesis, what happened in Genesis 12, actually, what happened in Genesis 12 is God erected this middle wall of partition. In other words, He made He put a wall up that separated the Jews from the Gentiles. Does anybody know what that middle wall of partition was? It was the law. The middle wall of partition is the law. That was the law of Moses. That was the law. That is what made a distinction between Israel and the rest of the world. And when Paul talks about that over in Ephesians, I don't have the next verse up there, but he says in verse 14 that now, in this dispensation of grace, He has broken down the middle wall of partition which contained the commandments. In other words, that thing is no longer there. Because now, how is God dealing with Jews and Gentiles today? Yeah, I mean, He's not dealing with us differently anymore. Like today, here's part of the problem. People would think Israel today is still under the law. Are they? No. No, He wants to deal with them now. If they're saved, He wants to deal with them as part of the body of Christ. It's made up of both Jew and Gentile. But see, He did away. He broke down. This is what Paul said in that next verse 14, that He broke down that middle wall of partition, that it's no longer there. Now that's for us today. There's no middle wall of partition. He's dealing with all of us the same. But back here, there was a middle wall of partition, and so we have Israel being dealt with here. We have the world being dealt with here. Well, Satan has a two-pronged attack. One of those, of course, is to corrupt Israel and keep them from being used by Him. And the other one, of course, is to bring the world to a zenith of ungodliness and produce the works of darkness. And He was doing that back at the flood, and He even used angels to try to put that into a permanent position. And we won't have time to talk about that anymore today. Maybe we will next time. But that failed because God saved 8 souls on the ark and then destroyed the world. And so as He comes along from there, here's what Satan is still doing. He is still developing the world of the ungodly. And as it came through history, when Stephen is being stoned and he looks up and says, "I see the Son of Man standing at the right hand of the Father," you understand that the world has reached a point, because what was he doing before he was standing at the right hand of the Father? He was sitting at the right hand of the Father. And the Bible says he is sitting until it's time to make his enemies his footstool. In other words, to execute the day of wrath against his enemies. So when Stephen sees him standing, that's the signal the world is ready for and deserving of that wrath that was prophesied all the way back to Enoch, that is sitting all through Israel's scriptures. The prophets are full of the great and terrible day of the Lord, and the day of His fierce wrath, and the vengeance upon His enemies, and to avenge His cause with Israel. They're full of that. And so you realize that by the time you get here, that's the next thing on the calendar, and the Lord stands to signify that that time has arrived. But instead of coming back to orchestrate His day of wrath, the Lord secretly returns and intercepts Saul of Tarsus on the Damascus road and begins with the conversion of Saul, who is our apostle now. He starts an interruption, so to speak, or to just say it this way, a parenthesis that kind of pauses what was going on here, and he starts this dispensation of grace. And this evil that has been going on that now deserved to be judged is still there. But the judgment has been postponed until the end. But at the end of this dispensation of grace, which I firmly believe, and maybe I'm wrong, and if I am, I'll show up one day and tell you I was wrong. But I really believe that the way that this dispensation of grace is going to end is by the message of grace no longer being given, or that message no longer being received. And if the message of grace is either been shut down or totally rejected, what would that be a sign of as far as the world at large? What would that be a sign of?
Fullness of the Gentiles.
I'm sorry? Okay, fullness of the Gentiles, all right. That would be the fullness of the Gentiles. What would that say about the unbelieving world? Yeah. That they are at that pinnacle of a... By the way, can I just say it to you like this? This message is going to get shut down. This message of grace is going to get shut down. And there's going to be all kinds of means and ways that will be devised to do that. And anyone that defies that will pay a price for that. And there will come a time when this world no longer wants to hear about grace. Let me ask you a question. In Romans 1, didn't Paul talk about a time when the world no longer wanted to know God or have Him in their knowledge? And it's going to get there again. And here's the thing. The world was ready to be judged here. At the end, it's going to still be ready to be judged, and then it will be. Now, here's the point in what I'm trying to get to. All of this does have to do with what we're reading in Romans 13:12. Because if all I've done is given you a sufficient understanding that all the way up to this point, that Satan has been developing the world of the ungodly, and he has been utilizing the works of darkness that we're going to encounter in the next verse in Romans 13. And let's go over to Ephesians 6 for a moment. Let me remind you of what we saw last week, that the work of the rulers of the darkness of this world, their work is wildly successful today. And it was very successful back here. And this is really, I shouldn't have talked about where we are today. We are going to do that. But I'm really trying to do is get you up to here. Then here's what you have. This period of time that brought them to the brink of destruction, that would be the period of time that would be called the night. What is going to happen to them once this dispensation of grace comes to an end? What's the next thing on the calendar of events? Is anybody starting to put this together now? The night is far spent, and the day is at hand. You see, when Paul makes that statement, what you're supposed to realize is the things that brought everything to a head where God was ready to destroy them, that's the night. And if something is far spent, you know what that means? It's almost over. The day is at hand. That day when that is going to be judged. The world of the ungodly, it got postponed back here, but it didn't get done away with forever. And that first phrase is made now to make you realize that the time in which God inserted this was the very time when God would have otherwise have destroyed the world of the ungodly. Now there is something more that we need to realize about this, but I'm just trying to take all of this back to Romans 13:12 to that first phrase, that when he tells you the night is far spent, and then he's going to talk about things in conjunction with the night, the works of darkness and those kinds of issues, that's all the work that Satan is doing to try to produce something back here. Now, is there going to be anything for us in that? Because yes, even though that is talking about the timing of the dispensation of grace, is there anything for us there? Yes, because look, when this dispensation of grace came in, did the world suddenly become godly? Did the works of darkness continue to get produced? Did the policy of evil keep going? Indeed it did. And so what we're going to be called on to do, we're going to be made to realize some things about what was happening in this night, and that policy of evil is still at work in the dispensation of grace. And now, for the first time, I'm talking about in this dispensation of grace, for the first time, men are going to have the true ability to cast off those works of darkness. And that's something that Satan is not going to tolerate well, because it's those works that he is promoting to bring the world to a place of destruction once again. Okay, there is more to know about that. But at least now can you begin to see that in this phrase, the night is far spent, the day is at hand, what you're seeing are the things that led up to this, and it hasn't happened yet because God put the dispensation of grace in there where He did. But as soon as it's over, the thing that God was going to do is now going to be fulfilled in the day of the Lord's wrath. Does everybody get that? Okay, so now you've got the first part of what's supposed to be in your thinking when you read that phrase. And I know we covered a lot of stuff and we looked at different things, and I am begging you to read the notes so that you can see that once again. So look at the verses and let's point that out, clearly so that you can see that. And when we come back next time, we're going to pick that up, because all we've done so far is begin to look at that first phrase, which is the godly thinking. It's getting you thinking about things in a particular way. Because the next thing you have to learn is the godly living, of casting off the works of darkness and putting on the armor of light. So Sandy?
Just for clarification, I see on the chart Noah is 10. Why is he shown as the 8 in Scripture?
Why? He's the 8th generation from Adam. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm sorry, 7th, not the 8th. The 7th from Adam.
A part of the 7th.
Huh?
Well, if you count each flock there, he's in number 10.
Oh, you're talking about Noah. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought we were talking about Enoch. We said Enoch, the 7th from Adam, prophesied. You're talking about Noah. Why is he the 10th?
Yeah, it's 10 there that he's saying Noah the 8th.
Oh, no. Someone asked me that last week. He's the 8th. He's the 8th. Why? Yeah, because there's 8 people on the boat. He's the 8th. Yeah, remember there's Noah and his wife, his 3 sons, and their 3 wives. He's the 8th. He's the 8th. He didn't mean generations from Adam. He meant he's the 8th. He's on the boat. Yeah.
I thought maybe you might clarify that in case somebody else had.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. That's a good question. It took me a minute to realize what you were asking even, so I can imagine what someone... Does everybody get that? About Adam being the 8th person? The 8th person on the boat. I don't know that that's a specific reference to who was on the boat first, but if you're Noah, who are you putting on the boat first? He's going to be the last one to get on. So you know what? He's the 8th. He's the last one. And that's the end, right? By the way, 8 numbers, if you want to talk about that, 8 is the number of new beginning. Isn't it? And the old world perishes, and those 8 people are going to walk off the boat, and guess what? There's going to be a new beginning, so to speak. And that's why I was talking about God's kind of hitting the reset button, and let's start this thing over. Does that make sense to everybody about Noah being the 8th? I'm sorry, Sandy. I was thinking about Enoch, the 7th from Adam. I don't know why that was stuck in my head. Who knows?
I missed last week. I thought maybe you...
Oh, did you miss last week?
Yeah.
I'm going to go home today and get back in the bed, and I'm going to hit the reset button. I'm sorry. I thought wow. Okay. I'm sorry.
Well, I've been here, I
you know what? I'm sorry. Who are you people and what are we doing here? I have no idea what's going on. Okay, I hope all that's not on the tape. Just saying. Let's have a word of prayer. Father, we are grateful for your word and for what it says to us, and we realize that when Paul makes this very simple statement, the night is far spent, the day is at hand, that there's a whole lot of things that go into understanding that phrase. But understanding that phrase is crucial for us to be able to perform the godly living that you're going to ask us to do. And all of that is leading up to our engaging with you in an operation against the adversary in this dispensation of grace. It is our desire to do that. And we thank you for the privilege of it. And I'm so grateful for this group of people that come and that listen and that want to know. We pray, Lord, to be able to understand the things that are in your word and for those things to do their effectual work in us. So may we make the most of the opportunities that we have to do this. May we be conscious that the time that we have to get this education is diminishing, and may we make the most. May there be that sense of urgency about getting this education not only understood but implemented, and then integrate that, Lord, into the labor aspect of us serving you now, putting those skills into practice. And we pray to do so